What you are about to hear is not a fairy tale. It happened in the heart of Manhattan, inside the glittering Imperial Astor Ballroom, on a night when generosity was sold like champagne, and every smile carried a price tag. The St. Gabriel Children's Foundation Gala drew the city's most celebrated names, a constellation of power and privilege, orbiting beneath chandeliers that glowed like captive stars. At each table sat fortunes large enough to rebuild a city block, and yet the air was charged with boredom, as though the wealthy had grown weary of their own excess. Into this theater of affluence moved Lena Moreau, a server whose black and white uniform rendered her invisible among gowns that shimmered like liquid jewels. Her steps were precise, efficient, almost balletic. A silver tray rested on her palm with the balance of a dancer's pirouette, but none of the guests noticed. They never did. To them, she was part of the scenery, a shadow carrying crystal and silence. Lena's mind, however, was not anchored to the ballroom. Earlier that morning, an email had arrived from the Armitage Conservatory Alumni Grant Committee. Another rejection, another sealed door. 4 years ago, an accident and a cascade of family debt had forced her from the stage to the service floor. She had promised herself she would return someday, but promises were fragile things when rent was due and medicine bills came in unmarked envelopes. Still, the muscle of memory never truly sleeps. As she weaved through the crowd, the scent of waxed floors and flowers stirred echoes of rehearsal halls, resin, sweat, music trembling through old wood. For a heartbeat, she felt the ghost of stage lights against her skin. Then a guest's sharp laugh shattered the reverie, and the weight of the tray reminded her who she was tonight. At table 17 sat Alden Harrington III, heir to a dynasty that owned towers stabbing the skyline. He lounged with the easy arrogance of a man who had never known consequence. To his right, Serena Vale, sculpted perfection draped in silver silk, and to his left, Trent and Logan, courtiers whose laughter rose on command. Their conversation fluttered over stock indexes and art auctions, a language of wealth detached from gravity. When Lena refilled their glasses, Alden's gaze snagged on her like a hook. It wasn't curiosity, it was appraisal, the cold study of a specimen. She felt the prickle of it across her skin, but kept her expression neutral, the mask of professionalism forged through countless shifts. A droplet slid from the lip of a carafe, a pinhead bead landing on the white tablecloth. Alden's voice, smooth yet edged with amusement, cut through the hum of the room. "You missed a spot, didn't you?" Heads turned. Trent's chuckle followed, thin and sharp. Lena dabbed the cloth, murmured an apology, and stepped back. But Alden wasn't finished. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming with the thrill of an audience. In the lull between songs, he rose, lifting his champagne flute as if to toast. The band shifted to a sultry tango, the rhythm flickering like heat through the air. Alden's smile broadened. "I have a proposition," he announced, letting his voice carry. A hush rippled outward, curiosity sharpening across nearby tables. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a money clip heavy with bills. $10,000 if you can dance this tango with me and not make a fool of yourself. Fail, and you walk out tonight without a job. The word struck like a slap. Laughter bubbled from Trent and Logan. Serena's painted lips curved into a delighted smirk. All eyes turned to Lena. The servant suddenly cast center stage in a cruel pageant. For a heartbeat, time stilled. She saw her mother's pill bottles lined on the kitchen counter, the past due notice folded in her apron, the unread audition flyers crumpled at the bottom of a drawer. And she saw Alden's expression, confident, dismissive, certain she would bow, apologize, disappear. A slow breath steadied her. The pulse of the tango thrummed in her chest, awakening something long dormant. When she finally met his eyes, the room seemed to tilt. "All right," she said softly, each syllable clear as glass. "I accept." A murmur swept the ballroom, disbelief mingled with anticipation. Alden blinked, momentarily unsettled, then grinned, mistaking courage for desperation. The crowd leaned in, hungry for spectacle. What he could not see was the spark behind her calm, the ignition of a fire that would soon consume the hierarchy of the room. The line had been crossed, and for the first time in years, Lena Moreau stood on a stage worthy of her defiance. The music swelled across the ballroom, its rhythm pulsing through marble floors and mirrored walls. Yet Lena Moreau heard it as something older, something buried beneath years of silence. Around her the crowd pressed in, a ring of jeweled faces lit by curiosity and the faint thrill of impending humiliation. To them she was a novelty, a servant daring to breach the invisible line between service and spectacle. To Alden Harrington III she was prey, cornered in the glow of chandeliers and expectation. She moved without haste, each gesture deliberate. First the tray, placed neatly upon a side table, then the ties of her apron, loosened with calm precision. The starched fabric folded twice and set beside the crystal glasses. A hush rippled outward, as if the room sensed the gravity of this small ritual. When she stepped out of her sensible shoes, standing in plain black socks upon the carpet, a murmur drifted through the assembly. Evan Cole, the freelance photographer hired to capture polished smiles and charity bids, adjusted his lens. The scene before him no longer resembled society reportage, but theater, an ancient story dressed in couture and champagne. He framed his shot, the discarded shoes, the folded apron, the quiet defiance etched into Lena's face. Across the circle, Alden extended a hand, mock chivalry gilding his arrogance. "Shall we begin?" he asked, voice dripping with amusement. Lena did not take his hand. She stepped past him into the open space cleared between tables, her eyes closed for a single breath. The murmurs faded, replaced by the distant echo of rehearsal halls, the scent of rosin, the thrum of orchestra floors beneath her feet. When she opened her eyes again, the ballroom vanished from her mind. All that remained was the music. The band launched into Astor Piazzolla's Libertango, its melody sharp and seductive, a challenge carved in rhythm. She knew every rise and fall, every heartbeat of its dangerous grace. Alden approached with the confidence of lessons purchased at exclusive studios, the practiced bearing of a man who believed mastery could be bought. He gripped her hand, set the frame, and led the first step, rigid, mechanical, flawless in theory, yet soulless in execution. Lena followed, pliant, gauging his rhythm, allowing him the illusion of control. The audience watched, some amused, others uneasy, sensing the undercurrent building beneath the polished surface. On the third measure the tide shifted, Lena's weight changed, subtle as breath, and the lead dissolved. Her body answered the music, not the man. A turn unfolded, swift and precise, drawing Alden off balance. The flicker of surprise in his eyes caught the chandelier light. He stumbled, recovered, forced a grin, but the moment had slipped from his grasp. The tango tightened, each note a blade. Lena's movements flowed with instinctive clarity. Ocho, pivot, a sharp gancho that brushed the hem of Alden's tailored trousers. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. What had begun as a cruel amusement was becoming revelation. She was no servant fumbling for survival. She was an artist resurrected by rhythm. Alden tried to reclaim dominance, leading into complex sequences learned by rote, but Lena anticipated every shift. She turned his momentum against him, guiding the pattern with invisible authority. The crowd leaned forward, enthralled, champagne glasses forgotten. Even Serena Vale's painted composure fractured, her smile tightening as she recognized the spectacle's reversal. Evan's camera clicked in rapid bursts, capturing fragments that would soon circle the world. The blur of motion, the gleam of sweat on Alden's temple, the fierce clarity in Lena's gaze. Each frame distilled the truth unfolding in real time. The powerful undone by grace, the overlooked rising through art. The music built toward its crescendo. Lena's feet traced arcs of fire across the carpet, her body a conduit of passion and control. Alden followed clumsily, reduced to a passenger in the dance he had orchestrated. The audience no longer whispered, they held their breath. As the final chords rang out, Lena spun free, extending her arms in a gesture that claimed the room. The last note hung suspended, shimmering like a held breath before silence fell. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then applause erupted, raw, unrestrained, a tidal wave crashing over gilt tables and crystal glassware. Lena stood motionless in its roar, chest rising, eyes luminous. She had crossed the line and discovered a stage waiting on the other side. Alden remained frozen, his face a canvas of disbelief and rising fury. The balance of power had shifted, not through wealth or cruelty, but through the unassailable truth of art. The ovation thundered through the ballroom, echoing off marble pillars and crystal chandeliers until it seemed the very building trembled with applause. Lena Moreau stood at the center of it all, breathless yet steady, her eyes bright with a fierce calm. Around her faces shone with astonishment, admiration, even shame, as if the crowd recognized too late the cruelty they had been complicit in. The servant had become the star, and the heir who sought to humiliate her now stood diminished beneath the weight of his own arrogance. Alden Harrington III felt the sting of the reversal like a slap. For a heartbeat he remained motionless, the roar of the room pressing against his ears, a sound not of celebration for him but of judgment. His chest burned with humiliation. He had wanted laughter, submission, a spectacle of superiority. Instead, he was the fool at the center of a story spinning beyond his control. He reached into his pocket, fingers trembling with anger, and pulled out the gleaming money clip. Without flourish, he ripped the stack of bills free and hurled them at Lena. The notes burst into the air like startled birds, fluttering down around her feet in a mockery of snowfall. The applause faltered, shock rippling through the onlookers. "There's your reward," Alden spat, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "You wanted a show. Now pick up your pay and get out." The words hung in the silence, ugly and brittle. No one moved. Serena Vale's jeweled hand hovered near her mouth, eyes darting between her fiancé and the woman standing barefoot before him. Trent and Logan shifted uneasily, their earlier amusement dissolving into discomfort. The crowd, so quick to cheer, now waited breathlessly, sensing a moment far larger than spectacle. Lena looked down at the scattered bills, the gleam of currency catching the ballroom's light. $10,000, more money than she had ever seen in one place. It could erase debts, buy medicine, offer a fragile cushion against the relentless grind of survival. For a single moment, the temptation tugged at her, whispering of relief. But above the whisper rose another voice, clear and unwavering, born from the fire still coursing through her veins. She lifted her gaze to Alden, meeting his eyes without flinching. The fury in his face was raw, almost boyish in its petulance. In that instant she saw not power, but fear. The fear of a man whose authority had been unmasked as hollow. "I did not dance for your money," she said quietly, each word measured, unshakable. "I danced because you tried to take my dignity, and I wanted to remind you that it cannot be bought." Gasps swept the room. The declaration cut deeper than any insult. Alden's jaw tightened, color rising to his cheeks, but he found no words to answer. The silence that followed belonged to her. Lena stepped back, leaving the bills untouched, their scattered edges trembling in the faint draft from the air vents. She walked to the side table, reclaimed her folded apron, slipped her feet into the heavy shoes she had discarded. The crowd parted instinctively as she moved toward the service door, their eyes tracking her, as though following the final steps of a queen's procession. At the threshold, she paused beside Genevieve Park, whose hands were clasped in anxious disbelief. "It's all right," Lena murmured, her voice gentle. "I think I'm done here." Then she pushed through the door and vanished into the quiet hum of the service corridor, leaving behind a ballroom heavy with awe and unease. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Then Evan Cole, camera still warm in his hands, exhaled sharply. He had captured everything: the arrogance, the transformation, the storm of applause, the rain of money, and the moment of refusal. It was more than a story, it was a parable. Across the floor, Alden remained rooted, his fists clenched around the empty money clip. He could feel the eyes upon him, the subtle shifting of allies into witnesses, of admirers into judges. Serena touched his arm, a fragile gesture meant to steady him, but he shook her off, the humiliation curdling into something darker. The damage was already done. In the space of a single dance, Lena Moreau had turned the heir of a dynasty into a symbol of contempt. The crowd's sympathy had changed allegiance, their applause a verdict he could not overturn. Somewhere beyond the ballroom, Lena walked into the night air, the cool breeze brushing against her flushed skin. She carried nothing in her hands, yet she felt richer than she had in years. Behind her, wealth glittered uselessly on the floor, a monument to the price she refused to pay. The night air outside the Imperial Astor Ballroom was cool and steady, a quiet balm after the feverish lights and eyes inside. Lena Moreau paused beneath the marble archway, her chest still rising with the rhythm of the tango that had set her free. The applause echoed faintly behind her, distant now, like thunder retreating beyond the horizon. She had walked away from the money, the job, the humiliation. What remained was silence, and the pulse of her own heartbeat reminding her she was still standing. She leaned against the stone pillar for a moment, letting the breeze sweep through her hair. The sharp taste of adrenaline lingered on her tongue. In the span of a few minutes, she had shattered the boundary that defined her life. She had been the servant, the invisible one, and suddenly the room had seen her. Yet the realization carried no triumph, only a calm clarity. Dignity was not applause, it was the quiet strength of walking away. Inside, Alden Harrington III stood at the center of chaos. The orchestra had faltered into uneasy silence. Guests murmured in clusters, voices overlapping in a storm of whispers. The image of the heir throwing money at a waitress was too raw to smooth over with charm. Serena Vale tugged at his sleeve, urging him toward the exit, but his pride anchored him in place. His father's name, his company's reputation, all of it seemed to shimmer precariously in the eyes of onlookers who now saw not a prince of society, but a spoiled boy caught in the act. Trent and Logan exchanged uneasy glances, muttering half-hearted jokes that died in the air. The laughter that had once fueled their arrogance now turned sour. No one dared to approach Alden. Even Genevieve Park, the manager, stood frozen near the stage, torn between duty to the gala and shame for what had unfolded under her watch. Evan Cole lowered his camera, reviewing the shots glowing on the small digital screen. Frame after frame told the story without words. The tension in Lena's shoulders as she refused the money. The stunned faces surrounding her, the bills suspended midair like confetti from a fallen empire. It was truth distilled into light and shadow. He knew instinctively this was bigger than society gossip. It was a glimpse of something universal, the defiance of the powerless, the crumbling of privilege. Beyond the ballroom doors, Lena began the walk home through streets shimmering with reflections of city lights. The heels of her worn shoes struck a soft rhythm on the pavement, echoing the tango's fading heartbeat. She thought of her mother, sleeping in their small apartment, of the overdue bills waiting on the kitchen table, of the letter from the grant committee folded in her bag. Nothing in her circumstances had changed, yet everything within her had shifted. She had remembered who she was. At a red light, she caught her reflection in a darkened shop window. Hair slightly disheveled, uniform creased, eyes alight with something fierce. The woman staring back was not broken. She was unfinished. Meanwhile, word of the scene inside the ballroom began to spread. Guests recorded fragments on their phones. Whispers turned to posts. And by the time Lena reached her block, the first headlines had already flickered online. Heir's dance dare backfires at charity gala. The city loved a scandal, especially one gilded with moral irony. Alden's publicist, summoned in haste, advised immediate damage control. A formal apology, a donation to the foundation, a press release emphasizing misunderstanding. But no crafted statement could erase the image of him flinging money at a woman who refused to bow. The narrative had escaped his grip. At home, Lena sat in the dim glow of the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of cooling tea. The apartment smelled faintly of chamomile and disinfectant, a blend of comfort and fatigue. She replayed the night in fragments, the moment the dare was spoken, the taste of fear on her tongue, the surge of music carrying her across the floor, the sound of her own voice declaring what could not be bought. Each memory arrived sharp and luminous, etching itself into her mind like steps in choreography. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, perhaps unemployment, perhaps obscurity once the story faded. But beneath the uncertainty pulsed a quiet certainty. She had faced the power that sought to reduce her, and had not bent. Somewhere across the city, in a penthouse glowing with imported light, Alden stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. For the first time in his life, a stranger's eyes had stripped him bare. He replayed the dance in restless flashes, unable to decide which hurt more, the stumble in his steps or the truth in her refusal. Morning crept over the city with a thin veil of mist clinging to the streets, softening the edges of glass towers and neon signs. Lena Moreau woke before dawn, her body aching from hours on her feet, her mind still replaying the night's chaos in restless fragments. The echo of music lingered in her chest, the pulse of a tango that refused to fade. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, hands clasped, staring at the faint light pushing through the curtains. Nothing in the room had changed, the same peeling wallpaper, the same cracked mug on the nightstand, but something inside her had shifted beyond return. On the kitchen table lay the folded letter from the Armitage Conservatory, the curt rejection that had stung more than she had admitted. Next to it, a stack of unpaid bills waited like silent judges. The practical voice in her head whispered of consequences. She had walked away from her job. Pride would not pay rent, nor would dignity fill a prescription. Yet even as worry pressed down, another voice rose stronger, steady and alive. She had reclaimed the part of herself the world had tried to bury. Across town, in a penthouse overlooking the skyline, Alden Harrington III stared at the glow of his phone screen, scrolling through headlines that repeated the same words with merciless clarity. Heir's arrogant dare backfires. Ballroom tango turns tables. Viral humiliation for Harrington dynasty. Every image showed Lena's poised defiance, her bare feet on the carpet, the money scattered like the debris of his pride. His name, once a symbol of untouchable privilege, now trailed mockery across social feeds. Serena Vale entered the room quietly, wrapped in a silk robe, her expression composed but distant. She set a cup of coffee beside him and spoke softly. "Damage control is underway. Father's office wants a statement by noon. You should apologize." Alden clenched the cup, knuckles whitening. "I will not grovel to a waitress," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Serena studied him a long moment, the faint edge of disappointment flickering in her eyes. Then she turned away, leaving him with the reflection of his own unraveling. In the newsroom of a small digital magazine, Evan Cole adjusted the brightness on his monitor, reviewing the photographs he had captured. Each frame burned with story. Lena stepping into the spotlight, Alden's stunned expression, the fall of currency like confetti of guilt. He felt the weight of them, sensing a truth deeper than scandal. It was a portrait of the moment when illusion cracked, when the invisible claimed visibility. He drafted an article, careful with each word, determined to honor what he had witnessed. By mid-morning, Lena ventured out, her steps hesitant yet purposeful. The city hummed with indifferent rhythm, buses groaning, shopkeepers lifting shutters. She passed a cafe window and caught a glimpse of her own face on a television screen, framed by bold letters recounting the Gala debacle. Her breath caught. The footage showed her dance in fragments, her voice clear as she refused the money. Strangers inside the cafe turned toward the screen, murmuring admiration. She moved on quickly, heart pounding, uncertain whether to feel pride or fear. At a nearby park bench she sat, watching pigeons gather at her feet. The world had seen her now. There was no retreat into anonymity. Yet with exposure came risk, curiosity, intrusion, judgment. She wondered if Alden's fury would end at humiliation or sharpen into retaliation. Power rarely forgave defiance. Still, beneath the unease pulsed a quiet exhilaration. For the first time in years, doors that had seemed sealed now trembled on their hinges. Somewhere, perhaps, someone had recognized the dancer beneath the uniform. In a glass-walled office high above the streets, Maxim Trevino, the renowned choreographer, watched the same footage on a tablet handed to him by his assistant. His sharp eyes tracked Lena's movements, noting precision born not of training alone but of instinct, of lived pain transformed into grace. "Find her," he said simply. "She belongs on a stage, not behind a tray." As the day waned, the city's gossip deepened into narrative. To some, Lena became a symbol of resistance. To others, a fleeting curiosity in the endless churn of stories. She returned home at dusk, weary yet strangely hopeful. Standing before the mirror, she touched her reflection as though meeting an old friend. The shadow she had carried for years stirred and stretched, no longer content to hide. The night closed around her softly, filled with whispers of change. Somewhere beyond the horizon, opportunity was waking, and so was the reckoning her defiance had set in motion. Evening descended over the city with a restless hum, the skyline painted in gold and violet as lights flickered awake one by one. Lena Moreau stood at the edge of a crowded plaza, the air scented with roasted chestnuts and rain-soaked pavement. Screens in shop windows replayed fragments of the gala again and again, her barefoot figure spinning through the footage like a ghost freed from glass. Strangers paused to watch, murmuring, their faces reflecting admiration or curiosity. She turned away, uneasy beneath the weight of recognition she had never sought. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, an unfamiliar number flashing across the screen. After a moment's hesitation, she answered. A calm voice introduced itself as Leah Stone, assistant to Maxim Trevino. "We saw the footage. Maestro Trevino would like to meet you tomorrow morning at the Meridian Theater." Lena's breath caught, words scattering before she could form them. The assistant continued, precise and polite. 10 o'clock. Come prepared to move." The line went silent. She stood motionless as the city swirled around her. The name Maxim Trevino carried the resonance of legend, performances that had redefined modern dance, stages across continents, reviews that spoke of movement as poetry. To be summoned by him felt impossible, like hearing a door open in a wall she had long accepted as permanent. Yet with the spark of hope came doubt. She had been away from the stage for years. Her body remembered, but would it obey? Meanwhile, in a glass tower overlooking the river, Alden Harrington III sat in his father's office, the polished oak desk gleaming beneath cold light. Alden Harrington Jr., silver-haired and stern, slid a tablet across the surface. The screen showed headlines, commentaries, investors questioning leadership. "You turned a charity gala into a scandal," his father said, voice low and measured. "Do you understand what that means for this company?" Alden's jaw tightened. "It was a mistake, overblown. The internet moves on." His father leaned forward, eyes sharp as a blade. "It moves on when we control the narrative. Right now, we do not. You will issue a public apology, double the family's donation, and stay silent until instructed otherwise. One more headline, and you're finished." The heir who once believed himself untouchable sat in silence, resentment curdling beneath shame. He thought of Lena's steady gaze, the quiet conviction in her voice, and felt again the sting of helplessness he had never known. Across the city, Evan Cole finalized his article, pairing words with the haunting images he had captured. He titled it, "The Tango of Truth." His editor read in silence, then nodded slowly. "Publish." Within hours, the story spread across feeds and news sites, lauded for its honesty, its raw portrayal of class and courage. Lena's name became a symbol whispered in subways and coffee lines, a testament to grace against arrogance. That night, Lena stretched in the small living room, the creak of floorboards beneath her feet, muscles awakening with cautious familiarity. She moved through basic sequences, plie, turn, extension, each gesture stirring echoes of the life she had buried. The mirror reflected a woman, older, leaner, but the fire in her eyes had not dimmed. When she finally collapsed onto the worn rug, breath ragged, she felt both fear and exhilaration. Tomorrow would not be about spectacle. It would be a reckoning between who she had been and who she could become. Before sleep claimed her, she glanced once more at the bills on the table, the reminders of a life still precarious, yet for the first time, they did not feel like chains. They were merely weights she would learn to balance. As midnight deepened, Alden wandered through the empty ballroom where it had all begun. The air smelled faintly of wax and faded flowers. He replayed the music in his mind, the moment he lost control, the look on her face as she turned the dance into a declaration. In the quiet, he felt the first sting of realization. Money could buy applause, but not respect. In separate corners of the same city, two lives once intersecting in cruelty now turned toward transformation, one through humility, the other through hope. And as the clock struck 12, the stage of destiny shifted, readying itself for the next act. The morning arrived, cloaked in silver mist, the streets glistening with the remnants of night rain. Lena Moreau walked toward the Meridian Theater, her worn shoes tapping against the pavement in quiet rhythm. The city around her seemed unfamiliar, as though the world had tilted slightly since the gala. Every billboard and newsstand whispered fragments of her name. Every reflection reminded her of the line she had crossed. She clutched a small bag containing a leotard, dance shoes, and a bottle of water, tokens of a past she had almost forgotten how to claim. The theater loomed ahead, its facade weathered but noble, the marquee unlit and solemn. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of sawdust and velvet, mingled with the ghost of countless performances. Leah Stone met her in the lobby, clipboard in hand, expression composed yet kind. "Maestro Trevino is waiting," she said softly, leading Lena through dim corridors that opened into a rehearsal hall flooded with pale light. Maxim Trevino stood at the far end, a figure of quiet authority in black, his silver hair bound at the nape of his neck. His eyes, sharp yet compassionate, studied Lena as she entered. "You are the one from the gala," he said, "the one who danced when cornered." Lena inclined her head, unsure how to answer. He gestured toward the center of the room. "Show me what freedom looks like when no one is watching." For a moment she froze, the weight of expectation pressing upon her. The floor stretched wide and bare, the mirrors reflecting every hesitation. Then she inhaled, closed her eyes, and let silence become music. Her body began to move, not polished, not rehearsed, but honest. Each step carried memory, each turn a confession. She danced the years of invisibility, the ache of lost dreams, the defiance of that night when she refused to bow. Trevino watched without speaking, his gaze following the fluid arcs of her motion. She stumbled once, breath catching, but did not stop. When the final gesture faded, she stood still, chest heaving, eyes wet with exhaustion and release. The choreographer stepped forward slowly. "Technique can be taught," he said. "Truth cannot. You have it. If you wish, there is a place for you in my company. We begin rehearsals next week." Lena's breath hitched. Gratitude and disbelief warred within her, yet words felt too small. She simply nodded, her voice caught somewhere between fear and joy. As she left the theater, sunlight broke through the clouds, bathing the steps in gold. She paused at the top, the city unfurling before her like a stage awaiting its next act. For the first time in years, possibility felt tangible. Across town, Alden Harrington III faced a different kind of stage. A press conference had been arranged in a sleek conference room lined with cameras and microphones. His father's advisors circled like hawks, rehearsing the statement he would deliver. It was filled with contrition, crafted to sound sincere. But as he read the words aloud, they tasted hollow. The apology was not his. It was an instrument of preservation, a shield for reputation. When the lights of the cameras blinked on, he spoke the lines as instructed. Yet beneath the polished tone, disquiet stirred. He thought of Lena's calm defiance, of the way she had walked away with nothing but dignity. Her silence had carried more power than all his declarations. Afterward, he returned to his office, the applause of reporters still echoing faintly. The statement would repair the company's image, his father assured him, but the victory felt empty. For the first time, Alden wondered what it meant to build a life on foundations he had not earned. That evening, Lena returned home to find an envelope slipped beneath her door. Inside lay a letter from a local arts fund, acknowledging her viral moment and offering a modest scholarship for continued study. She traced the words with trembling fingers, overwhelmed by the sudden generosity unfolding from the storm she had endured. In the quiet of her small apartment, she stretched once more, feet brushing the floorboards like whispers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, rehearsals, scrutiny, expectation. But tonight she allowed herself to dream. The stage she had longed for was no longer a memory. It was waiting, and she was ready to step into its light. The days that followed unfolded with a strange rhythm, each morning dawning brighter yet heavier than the one before. Lena Moreau woke before sunrise, her mind already rehearsing movements, her heart thrumming with anticipation. At the Meridian Theater, the rehearsal hall became her sanctuary and her crucible. Maxim Trevino pushed her beyond fatigue, demanding precision born not from obedience but from truth. Again, he would say, until every step carried intention, until every gesture spoke of what words could not. The company dancers, seasoned and sharp, watched her with curiosity that teetered between respect and skepticism. She was the outsider, the woman who had stumbled into fame by accident. Yet in each rehearsal she earned ground not through reputation, but through relentless honesty. Her body, once dulled by years of servitude, began to remember. Balance returned, lines sharpened, and in the mirror she glimpsed the shadow of the artist she had once dreamed to be. After rehearsal she lingered alone, tracing the edges of the floor with her bare feet, feeling the grain of the wood beneath her soles. The room echoed faintly with ghostly applause, the memory of countless performers who had spilled their souls upon that stage. She whispered to herself, almost in disbelief, "You are here. You are allowed to exist again." Beyond the sanctuary of the theater, the world still buzzed with her story. Journalists reached out for interviews, sponsors dangled opportunities, strangers sent messages of admiration. But Lena hesitated. The fame felt fragile, a reflection of spectacle rather than substance. She wanted to be known for her craft, not for the humiliation she had endured. So she turned away from cameras and chose the quiet work of becoming whole. Across the city, Alden Harrington III lived within a storm of damage control. His public apology had softened headlines but not memory. Investors stabilized, the company's stock regained footing, yet whispers persisted in corridors of power. The heir was reckless, they said, arrogant, a liability. He drowned the murmurs in endless meetings, hollow gestures, charity donations meant to cleanse his image. But at night, when the city dimmed and silence closed around him, he saw her eyes again, calm, unwavering, unbought. For the first time, he began to question the architecture of his life. Every achievement bore his family's name, not his own. Every victory had been arranged before he took the field. What did he truly possess? He sought distraction in the familiar. Gala invitations, lavish dinners, circles of privilege. But the laughter around him now rang false. The mirror reflected a man draped in wealth yet stripped of worth. One evening, he found himself standing before the Imperial Astor Ballroom once more. The chandeliers glittered beyond the glass, but he could not cross the threshold. The memory of the scattered bills burned like an unhealed wound. Outside, in the quiet, he understood the depth of what he had tried to purchase that night. Dignity was not a commodity, and respect could not be demanded. It had to be deserved. Meanwhile, Evan Cole's article continued to ripple outward. University students debated its meaning in ethics classes. Commentators dissected the symbolism of the dance, and art critics hailed it as a modern fable of class and courage. Yet, for Evan, the greatest reward was simpler. He had captured truth. He began drafting a follow-up piece, tracing Lena's transformation from anonymity to artistry, determined to frame her not as a victim or a viral sensation, but as a creator reclaiming her voice. As weeks passed, Lena's world narrowed to movement and purpose. She worked late into the evenings, muscles trembling, breath sharp, sweat darkening the floor. Pain became familiar, almost comforting, a reminder that rebirth demanded cost. Maxim watched her progress in silence, offering few words but an approving nod when her steps finally aligned with the music's pulse. One night, after rehearsal ended and the hall emptied, he approached her quietly. "You carry sorrow in your dance," he said, "but also grace. Do not lose one in chasing the other. Balance them, and the audience will see themselves in you." Lena absorbed his words, recognizing their truth. The stage was not merely a place to perform, it was a mirror, reflecting every scar, every triumph, every choice. Outside, the city glowed with promise. The Gala scandal was fading from headlines, replaced by newer spectacles, but within its ashes, something enduring had taken root. Lena was no longer the invisible servant. She was an artist rising from the quiet, and her redemption was no longer a hope. It was becoming a reality forged step by step. Winter settled over the city with a hush that softened its edges. Snow clung to rooftops and blurred the noise of traffic, turning the streets into pale corridors of reflection. Inside the Meridian Theater, warmth radiated from the rehearsal hall, where Lena Moreau moved through the final sequence of the upcoming performance. The piece, titled Echoes, told a story of loss and reclamation, an odyssey that mirrored her own. Each movement carried a fragment of truth, each pause a breath drawn from the depths of memory. Maxim Trevino watched from the edge of the floor, arms folded, eyes sharp. He offered no correction, only silence, allowing her to hear the music beneath the music, the steady pulse of her own resolve. When the final note faded, Lena stood motionless, chest rising, a faint tremor in her hands. Trevino nodded once. "You are ready," he said simply, and left her to the echo of his words. Outside the theater, the city held its breath for the premiere. Articles teased her return, critics speculated on the symbolism of her rise, and whispers of redemption wove through the arts community. Yet beneath the praise lay tension. Fame, like light, cast long shadows. Lena felt them gathering at the edges of her days, reporters waiting at stage doors, strangers seeking autographs, and opportunists hoping to claim a fragment of her story. One afternoon, as she left rehearsal wrapped in a wool coat, a man stepped from the crowd with a microphone in hand. "Miss Moreau," he called, "how does it feel to dance again after being humiliated by Alden Harrington?" She froze, the question slicing through the calm she had built. Cameras flashed, the reporter pressed closer. "Do you forgive him? Does he deserve redemption?" Lena's breath misted in the cold air. "Forgiveness," she said quietly, "is not mine to grant or deny. We all answer to the lives we build." Then she turned and walked away, the snow swallowing the clamor behind her. Across town, Alden Harrington III sat in the boardroom of his family's company, the glow of screens reflecting quarterly reports and press statements. His father spoke in clipped tones about restructuring, philanthropy, and rebuilding trust, but Alden's mind drifted. He had fulfilled every demand, recited every apology, yet the hollowness remained. No statement could rewrite the truth of that night, or the silence that had followed. That evening, he visited a small gallery downtown where a charity exhibition displayed photographs from the Gala. On one wall hung Evan Cole's iconic shot, Lena barefoot, eyes blazing, surrounded by falling money. Alden stood before it for a long time, the weight of his choices pressing upon him. In the frozen frame, he saw not only her defiance, but his own emptiness. For the first time, he felt the stirrings of a need not for image, but for change. Evan Cole noticed him standing there. He approached carefully, uncertain of his reception. "I never meant to destroy you," Evan said. "The story was bigger than either of us." Alden nodded, eyes still on the photograph. "Maybe destruction was what I needed." Back at her apartment, Lena prepared for the premiere in silence. She pinned her hair, adjusted her costume, and stared into the mirror. The woman who gazed back carried scars unseen but unashamed. She had walked through humiliation, through poverty, through the doubt of others, and emerged with a voice that spoke without words. When the curtain rose that night, the audience watched in reverent stillness as she danced. The music surged, and Lena became both memory and promise, her movements a tapestry woven from pain and grace. In the final sequence, she knelt, lifted her face toward the light, and extended her hand as though offering something beyond forgiveness, understanding. Among the spectators sat Alden, anonymous in the dark. As her hand reached upward, something within him shifted. He did not expect absolution, only clarity. The performance ended in thunderous applause, and he remained seated, eyes wet, recognizing at last that dignity could not be taken from another. It could only be forfeited. Outside the theater, snow continued to fall, erasing footprints, cleansing the city in quiet layers. Lena stepped into the night, wrapped in exhaustion and peace. She had faced the mirror of consequences and found not bitterness, but balance. In her silence, the world heard everything. The night of the second performance arrived cloaked in anticipation. The Meridian Theater glimmered beneath strings of golden lights, its doors opening to a tide of patrons wrapped in winter coats and murmurs. Inside, the air was electric with expectation. Critics had hailed the premiere as a revelation, and tonight the audience was filled with artists, donors, and dreamers who had come to witness the woman whose defiance had become legend. Backstage, Lena Moreau stood before the mirror in her dressing room, surrounded by the quiet hum of preparation. Her costume shimmered softly beneath the bulbs, its fabric woven with hints of silver that caught the light like whispers of dawn. She studied her reflection and saw not perfection but presence. A woman tempered by fire, unafraid to face herself. The scars within no longer spoke of defeat. They were proof of survival. Leah Stone entered with a clipboard pressed to her chest, her usual composure tinged with warmth. "The house is full," she said gently. "Maestro Trevino wants you to remember to breathe." Lena smiled faintly. Breathing had become the hardest part, steadying the storm that churned beneath calm waters. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and let the sound of the orchestra tuning drift through her. In the lobby, Alden Harrington III lingered near the back, hat pulled low, coat collar raised. He had not planned to return, but something in the first performance had unsettled him, a pull he could not resist. He had come not seeking forgiveness but understanding, drawn by the truth her art revealed. Around him, whispers rippled as people recognized his profile, but he ignored them, eyes fixed on the stage curtain waiting to rise. When the lights dimmed, silence fell like snowfall. The orchestra began its prelude, a slow ascent of strings that shimmered through the dark. Then the curtain lifted, revealing Lena standing center stage, motionless, yet radiating stillness so profound it commanded the room. The piece unfolded as a journey through shadow and light. Each sequence carried layers of meaning: the trembling steps of loss, the spiral of struggle, the slow unfurling of grace. Lena moved with the precision of memory and the wildness of freedom, her body translating truths that words could not contain. Midway through, the music deepened into a haunting melody, and a soft rain of petals drifted from above. She danced through them as though wading through fragments of her past, every motion a reconciliation between who she had been and who she had become. In the final crescendo, she reached upward, palms open, surrendering to the light that poured over her like dawn. The audience rose in unison, applause swelling into thunder. Flowers rained upon the stage, voices crying her name. Lena bowed, her heart pounding, but as she lifted her gaze, her eyes caught a figure in the shadows near the back, Alden, standing still amid the ovation. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met. There was no anger there, no triumph, only a quiet recognition of two lives forever altered by one night of truth. After the curtain call, she retreated backstage, breathless, surrounded by congratulations and embraces. Maxim Trevino approached, his expression softened with pride. "You have given them something real," he said. "Hold it close. It will guide you farther than fame." Later, when the theater emptied and quiet settled like dust, Lena stepped out into the cold. Snowflakes spun beneath the street lamps, the city hushed and listening. She walked alone through the silent streets, her footsteps crisp against the pavement. Each breath rose in pale clouds, dissolving into the night. Behind her, the echoes of applause lingered, but they no longer defined her. The stage had become not a place of proving, but of being, a space where truth could breathe without permission. She thought of the path that had led her here, of the humiliation transformed into light, of the choices that had carved her into who she was now. Far away, Alden returned to his apartment, the sound of her dance still reverberating through his thoughts. He understood now that redemption was not an act to be demanded, but a life to be lived differently. For both of them, the world had shifted. Under the falling snow, Lena lifted her face to the sky, eyes closed, heart steady. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, she walked without fear, carrying the truth she had earned into the waiting dawn. Morning sunlight filtered through the wide windows of the Meridian Theater's rehearsal hall, spilling across polished floors where echoes of last night's ovations still lingered. Lena Moreau stood barefoot in the center, her reflection fractured across mirrored walls. The triumph had been intoxicating, but With dawn came a quiet unease. Fame, she had learned, was not freedom. It was a mirror that magnified everything, even the ghosts one tried to bury. Her phone buzzed on a nearby chair. Another message from reporters. Another request for interviews about the viral video that refused to fade. Headlines painted her as a symbol of defiance and grace, the woman who danced her way from humiliation to Broadway. Yet, beneath the applause, another current stirred, a question of what came next. She had reclaimed her art, but destiny, it seemed, had more debts to settle. At the same hour across the city, Alden Harrington III sat before his father in the towering glass office of Harrington Development. The skyline glittered behind them, cold and indifferent. Edward Harrington's gaze was sharp as a blade. "Do you understand what you've done?" he asked. "The company has become a target. Regulators are probing our contracts. Investors are circling like vultures, all because you couldn't keep your arrogance in check." Alden met his father's eyes, the weight of his disgrace pressing against his ribs. "It was never supposed to be like this," he murmured. "I thought it was a joke." His father's voice was ice. "Humiliation is never a joke when it costs millions. The board wants your resignation from all public roles, effective immediately." Alden nodded, feeling the last shreds of his old life unravel. The empire his family had built now stood on brittle ground. Yet beneath the shame, something unexpected flickered: clarity. The truth of what they had done to Lena's family, the contracts twisted in pursuit of profit, the dreams crushed beneath corporate heels. It was all part of a legacy he could no longer bear. That afternoon, Lena met Leah Stone and Maxim Trevino in the production office. Papers cluttered the table: press clippings, sponsorship deals, invitations to galas. Yet Maxim's attention was fixed on a letter delivered that morning, embossed with the Harrington crest. It was a formal apology signed by the company's board, acknowledging the harm caused to her family's business years before. Enclosed was an offer of restitution, large enough to erase every debt. Lena traced the signature with her fingertips, her stomach tightening. Money once again placed at her feet, but this time it came not as mockery, but as reparation. Still, she hesitated. "Can an apology buy back the years we lost?" she asked quietly. Maxim shook his head. "It cannot. But it can mark a beginning." Later, as twilight settled over the city, Lena walked through Riverside Park, the river glimmering like liquid steel. She found Alden waiting near the railing, dressed simply, stripped of the armor of wealth. The wind tugged at his coat as he turned to her, eyes heavy with remorse. "I came to listen, not defend," he said. "What I did that night was unforgivable, but it forced me to see everything my family's empire stands upon. It isn't strength, it's ruin built on silence." Lena studied him, searching for the man beneath the scandal. "You can't rewrite the past, Alden," she said, "but you can decide what you'll build from it." He nodded, voice low. "I intend to dismantle what needs to fall. If redemption exists, it must be earned, not inherited." They stood in silence as the city hummed around them, two souls bound by a night that had stripped them bare. The path ahead was uncertain, but something in Alden's eyes told her he was ready to walk it, even if alone. Back in her apartment, Lena placed the apology letter in a drawer beside her old dance shoes. It was a symbol, not of closure, but of choice. She no longer needed the world's validation. Her worth had been forged in defiance, her voice unshakable. As midnight neared, she returned to the empty stage of the theater, lights dimmed, floor cool beneath her feet. She danced in silence, each movement a prayer of release. The past no longer chained her. The reckoning was complete. And as she turned beneath the soft glow of the ghost light, Lena Moreau understood the truth she had fought to claim. Power was not in wealth or applause, but in the courage to forgive without forgetting and to rise without asking permission. The morning of the premiere's final week arrived with the city bathed in gold. Sunlight spilled over the rooftops of Manhattan, washing the streets clean after a night of rain. Lena Moreau stepped from a cab outside the theater, the world humming with a stillness that felt like destiny holding its breath. Inside her bag lay a letter she had written at dawn, sealed and waiting. A message not to the press, not to Alden, but to herself. A promise of who she would continue to become. The theater was quiet when she entered, the stage dim except for the solitary glow of the ghost light. She stood before it, inhaling the familiar scent of varnished wood and rosin. This space, once a battlefield, now felt like a sanctuary. Every echo of applause, every tear shed, every truth spoken, had carved it into a place of rebirth. She closed her eyes and whispered a silent gratitude to the pain that shaped her, to the humiliation that awakened her, to the courage that had carried her through. Outside, the world still buzzed with her story. Newspapers praised her artistry. Journalists hailed her resilience, and social media pulsed with admiration. Yet Lena knew that the truest victory was quieter than headlines. It lived in the simple knowledge that she had reclaimed her life from the hands of those who tried to define it. That afternoon, she met Maxim Trevino and Leah Stone in a small cafe overlooking the park. They spoke of the show's extension, of new investors drawn not by spectacle, but by sincerity. Maxim's eyes glimmered with pride as he said, "You turned a scandal into an anthem. Remember that art is most powerful when it reveals what the world wants to hide." Later, Lena walked alone through the park, the wind soft against her skin. She passed children chasing pigeons, musicians strumming beneath bare trees, strangers lost in their own stories. For the first time in years, she felt utterly present. The future stretched before her, unwritten yet radiant. She no longer feared its uncertainty. She welcomed it as a partner in the dance. In another corner of the city, Alden Harrington stood in the modest office of a new foundation he had quietly established. Its mission was simple: to provide grants for small family businesses devastated by predatory contracts, the same kind that had once destroyed Lena's father. Reporters sought his attention, but he refused interviews. Redemption, he had learned, was not a performance. It was a labor of humility, built action by action, far from the spotlight. That evening, Lena returned to the theater for the final performance of the season. Backstage, the cast gathered in a circle, hands linked, hearts steady. She looked around at the faces of fellow dancers, musicians, and crew, each one a fragment of the miracle that had carried her here. Tonight, she thought, we close a chapter, not the story. The lights dimmed, the curtain rose, and the music began, familiar yet freshly alive. Lena stepped into the glow, her movements infused with the quiet fire of everything she had endured. Every turn, every breath, every beat was a declaration. I am still here. I am whole. When the final note faded, the audience rose in a wave of applause that felt like an embrace. Flowers cascaded onto the stage, and Lena bowed deeply, tears glinting in her eyes. Yet even in that rapture, her gaze lifted beyond the crowd, toward the light that spilled from the rafters, warm and infinite. Afterward, she lingered in the empty theater, the ghost light burning steady. She opened the letter she had written and read it silently. You are no longer what they took from you. You are what you chose to become. Keep dancing. She folded the letter and left it on the stage, a testament to the journey that had brought her from servitude to sovereignty, from silence to song. Then she stepped out into the cool night, where the city glimmered like a constellation of second chances. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of beginnings. Lena walked toward the horizon, her shadow stretching long and free across the pavement. Behind her, the theater doors closed softly, not as an ending, but as a benediction. Ahead, the dawn waited, bright, unbound, and hers.